What if there was a way to interact with reality? I mean, really interact, not by asking for something you feel you lack, but by connecting with the deep internal feeling of already having it.
Yeah, like communicating with the universe, but the language isn't words of need. It's certainty, emotion.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're pulling insights from a stack of sources that explore what some might call a lost mode of prayer, or maybe a forgotten way of engaging with the world.
Right, and the sources we've looked at, they frame this less as, religious dogma and more like a science of feeling, a practice of living from the result.
The core idea being that the underlying field of reality, some call it the divine matrix, it seems to respond directly to the language of our deepest felt experience.
And what's really fascinating, looking across these different sources, is how this same core idea pops up. It's not just in one place. It echoes through different traditions, different personal stories. It suggests something pretty fundamental about our connection to creation itself.
Okay, let's unpack this then. And we're going to start, like our sources do, with this really powerful real-world story. So, picture this. You're in the high desert of northern New Mexico. It's the early 1990s.
Oh yeah, I remember reading about that time. A really tough drought.
Exactly. One of the worst droughts in recorded history, apparently. It had been going on for over 5 devastating years. Fields were just dust, cattle dying, families losing farms. I mean, a really desperate time.
You can only imagine. People must have been trying everything, absolutely praying for relief.
For sure.
Yeah.
And in this setting, one account describes this man. He's accompanying his Native American friend David to a sacred stone circle.
Okay.
And David explains, this is an ancient place built by ancestors. He described it as having a very thin skin between the worlds, a place specifically for prayer. And their purpose that morning, rain.
Okay, so if you're coming from, say, a typical Western background and you hear sacred place, prayer, need rain, you probably have a pretty clear expectation of what's going to happen next.
Totally. You're thinking, okay, here comes the ceremony, maybe some chanting, definitely asking, pleading for rain.
Right, asking for it.
And that's exactly what the man with David expected. But that's not what happened. Not at all.
So what did happen?
Well, David enters the circle, sits down, takes off his boots, steps barefoot onto the earth inside the circle, closes his eyes, and after just like a few seconds, he opens them again.
That's it?
That was pretty much it. Then he just turns to the man and asks if he's hungry.
Huh.
The man's totally confused, right? He asks, David, I thought you were going to pray for rain.
And David's answer here is, well, it's kind of the crux of this whole thing we're exploring, isn't it?
It really is. He looks at the man and says, really simply, no. If I prayed for rain, rain could never happen.
Wow. Okay, wait. If you prayed for rain, it could never happen. That seems to completely contradict how most people think about prayer.
Right. It flies right in the face of prayer being about asking for something you don't have.
Exactly. And David apparently explained why. He said the very act of praying for rain, it's like sending a signal to the universe, to the field, that says, rain isn't here now.
Ah, okay. You're acknowledging its absence.
Precisely. The prayer for something, seen this way, actually reinforces the lack of it in your present moment.
Okay. So if he wasn't asking for rain, what was he doing in those few seconds with his eyes closed?
He was feeling. That's what the account says David explained. He wasn't picturing rain clouds rolling in later. He was actively, bringing to life through his senses, through his emotions, the experience of rain already being there, having already fallen.
How did you do that?
He described feeling what it felt like to stand barefoot, sinking into deep, cool mud. Mud that could only be there because there'd been so much rain.
Okay, feeling the mud.
Yeah, and smelling that rich, damp smell of rain on dry earth,
Yeah.
And on the adobe walls of his village, he felt the corn stalks, tall, brushing against his chest, strong, because they'd had plenty of rain.
Wow, so completely immersing himself in the sensory details.
Exactly. And then crucially, he gave thanks. Not thank you for the rain that's coming, but gratitude, appreciation for the rain that had already happened in his feeling state.
He was living from the result, feeling it as if it had already taken place. So, Did it work? What happened?
Well, what happened next was pretty remarkable. The source describes it as a high correlation between the action and the result. Within just hours of David doing this, huge, heavy black clouds started building over the mountains.
Seriously, hours later.
Yeah. And then it started to rain. And it didn't just sprinkle, it rained and rained and rained.
Yeah.
Through the rest of that day, all night, into the next morning.
Whoa.
But the ground was so baked hard from those years of drought, it couldn't soak it up fast enough. So the result wasn't just rain, it was major flooding. Fields underwater, roads washed out.
Wow. From a 5-year drought to flooding, just like that. That's an incredibly powerful story, almost hard to believe.
It really is. And it highlights, anecdotally at least, this principle from an indigenous viewpoint that maybe the most powerful way to communicate with creation, with reality, isn't verbal request for the future, but through the language of feeling, senses, really inhabiting the state you desire right now.
And didn't the account mention something David said afterwards about the flooding?
Yeah, that was telling too. When the man called David later, kind of shocked by all the flooding, David apparently reflected and said something like, "That's the part of the prayer our ancestors could never quite figure out. They could tell it to rain, but they couldn't tell it how much to rain."
Huh. So it suggests they were tapping into some kind of mechanism, but maybe one that wasn't always easy to fine-tune, I guess.
Exactly, like dialing into a power source, but maybe not having perfect control over the volume knob.
Okay, so we have this really compelling story from a specific tradition. But does this mean this feeling-based approach is unique to, say, David's culture? Or is this hinting at something deeper, maybe an ancient principle that shows up elsewhere?
That's the big question, isn't it? And when you connect this story to the broader history of, spiritual and mystical practices across the globe, you do start seeing echoes of this idea in many ancient traditions.
Okay.
It really suggests this might not be just an isolated cultural thing, but maybe a fundamental principle about how consciousness interacts with the very fabric of reality.
And our sources actually draw a line from this modern story back to a really fascinating historical discovery, right? The Nag Hammadi library find in Egypt.
That's right, mid-20th century. Hugely significant find. Basically a collection of ancient texts hidden away in a jar for centuries. Books that were, lost or excluded from the biblical canon we know today.
And these are important because they're incredibly old.
Exactly. They represent some of the oldest known records of writings that eventually became the New Testament. So they offer this potential window into early Christian teachings before all the centuries of translation, interpretation, and theologization took place.
And one of the key texts found there was the Gospel of Thomas.
Yes, the Gospel of Thomas. It's presented as a collection of sayings attributed directly to Jesus, supposedly recorded by his disciple Thomas. And the really crucial part for our discussion today is that it seems to contain instructions on how students could communicate with what they called God.
Which, looking through the lens of these sources, could be understood as interacting with that universal field or divine matrix we mentioned earlier.
Precisely.
It really makes you wonder how much vital meaning, how much nuance could have been subtly shifted or even lost entirely as these ancient ideas were translated across languages, across cultures, over hundreds, even thousands of years.
Oh, absolutely. It's a critical point. Think about a phrase most people know or think they know from a Christian context regarding prayer. Something like the King James Version of John 16:23. Ask and ye shall receive.
Okay, yeah. That's pretty standard. Heard that one many times.
And for a lot of people, operating from that understanding, prayer becomes about asking for something, something you need, something you want, something you currently lack. And then when they ask and maybe don't seem to get it, it can lead to frustration, disappointment, feeling powerless, right? It reinforces this idea that the power is somewhere else outside of you, and you're just hoping for a response.
Which, if we circle back to David's insight in the desert, that's exactly the issue he pointed out.
Yeah.
Asking for it implies you don't have it.
Exactly. Now, compare that common translation, ask and ye shall receive, to an alternative translation of a similar passage. This one comes from the original Aramaic text of the Gospel of Thomas, as cited in the sources we looked at.
Aramaic, the language Jesus actually spoke, so potentially closer to the original meaning.
Potentially, yes. It could offer a more direct view before layers of translation.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What does the Aramaic version say?
It reads, ask without hidden motive, and be surrounded by your answer. Be enveloped by what you desire, that your gladness be full.
Wow, okay. Ask without hidden motive. And be surrounded by your answer. Be enveloped by what you desire. That feels profoundly different. The instruction, the implication, it's not the same as ask and you shall receive.
Not at all. And let's break that down, because this is really where that lost mode idea comes sharply into focus.
Okay.
First part, ask without hidden motive. What could that mean? Well, it suggests asking from a place of clarity, maybe. Not desperate need or underlying fear of not getting it.
Like being free from attachment to how it happens or when.
Yeah, perhaps. Or even the exact form the answer takes. It's like a clear intention, but without all the static of doubt or desperation clouding it. asking from a place of trust, maybe.
Okay, asking from non-attachment, clarity, makes sense.
But here's the part that really connects back to David in the desert. Be surrounded by your answer. Be enveloped by what you desire.
Be surrounded, be enveloped.
Think about what that literally means, to be surrounded by something, to be enveloped in it. The only way that can happen is if it's already present with you, right here, right now.
Whoa. Okay, so the instruction isn't ask and wait for it to show up later. It's put yourself in the reality where it's already here.
That's exactly how the sources interpret it. This ancient understanding seems to be an instruction to come from the state where the prayer has already been answered. Feel the outcome. Use your senses. Experience it emotionally, physically, as if it has already happened right now in the present moment.
Just like David, feeling the mud, smelling the rain, sensing the tall corn. He wasn't asking for rain, he was immersing himself, being surrounded, enveloped by the feeling and the sensory reality of the rain that had already fallen in his inner world.
Precisely. So the core principle we're seeing here, echoed in these ancient texts and brought to life by accounts like David's, seems to be about shifting. Shifting from a language of asking for something to become to a language of being. Inhabiting the desired reality now through feeling and sensory experience.
This sounds incredibly powerful, but I have to admit, it also sounds, well, maybe a bit abstract, or even impossible when you think about applying it to really big challenges in our lives today. You know, like health issues or financial struggles, complex relationships. How can we realistically use this principle, this lost mode, in a practical way? You called it a science earlier. How is it a science?
That's the absolutely crucial question, isn't it? And the sources we're drawing from, they don't present this as just, mystical wishful thinking or purely faith-based. They specifically describe it as a science of feeling.
A science of feeling.
Yeah, think of it like a technology, a practical method, a way to interact with the field, that matrix of potentiality we talked about.
Yeah.
And importantly, it's presented as not being tied to any specific religion or belief system. It's more about our fundamental relationship with creation itself.
Okay.
And using the language it seems to understand best, which appears to be the language of our consciousness, our focused intention, and importantly, our felt emotion.
A technology of feeling that does put a different spin on it. So what does this science actually involve day to day? How do you, practice it?
Well, the science part, as it's laid out in these sources, seems to focus heavily on the coherence of your inner state.
Coherence.
Yeah, coherence. It's about aligning things internally, aligning your intention, what you desire, with your emotion, the actual feeling of already having it, and your belief, that deep certainty that it's possible, or even that it's already done.
Okay, intention, emotion, belief, all lined up.
Exactly. And when those things are aligned, coherent, it creates this powerful, clear signal that seems to interact with the field. But it takes conscious effort, right? You have to deliberately shift your focus away from what you see as lacking towards the feeling of what you desire as if it's already present.
And what about that phrase from the Aramaic, without hidden motive? How does that fit in? How would you even know if you had a hidden motive?
I think that ties directly into the coherence piece. A hidden motive could be that underlying fear. I need this because I'm terrified of what happens if I don't get it. Or maybe doubt, well, this probably won't work, but hey, I'll give it a shot.
Right, or being really attached to it happening in one specific way only.
Exactly. So asking without hidden motive seems to mean checking in with yourself. Is the feeling truly one of joy or gratitude or peace that comes from the desired outcome itself? Or is it a feeling driven by the fear of not having it? It's about coming from a place of trust in the potential of the field, rather than desperation tied to current circumstances.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not just pretending or positive thinking on the surface. It's about genuinely cultivating the feeling of that desired reality while being free from the underlying static of doubt or fear.
That's the idea. And the sources offer some really compelling personal examples of this in action beyond just, dramatic weather changes. They talk about the analogy of physical healing. Think about a scraped knee. We have this conditioned expectation, right? It'll take days, maybe weeks to heal. And typically it does.
Yeah, pretty much.
But what if, the sources ask, we started with the feeling of the knee being already perfectly healed, strong, no pain at all? How might that shift the process?
So our ingrained expectations might actually be shaping the healing timeline.
It seems possible, doesn't it? The sources recount some powerful personal stories where this principle was applied quite deliberately. There was one about a significant health challenge involving a tumor, back around the year 2000.
Okay.
The person was fully preparing for a necessary surgery, doing all the practical things. But internally, they consciously applied this principle. They worked to cultivate the feeling of being healthy, whole, vibrant, as if the issue was already completely resolved. They lived from that deepest felt truth.
And what happened?
When they went back for the scheduled surgery, the doctors found there was no longer any need for it.
Wow. That's an extraordinary story.
It really is.
Yeah.
And while that's a dramatic example, the core idea, even in simpler applications, is that our bodies, maybe our immediate circumstances, perhaps even larger events, they seem to respond to this inner language, this language of feeling, of expectation, of inhabiting the outcome now.
It's a powerful suggestion that our inner state isn't just passively reacting to what happens outside us,
Right?
but it's an active participant in shaping that external reality.
That's the implication.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to manipulate the external world, like pushing buttons and pulling levers out there by asking it to change, this approach is about changing our internal reality first, changing our feeling state to match the reality we desire, and trusting that the field, the matrix, responds by rearranging circumstances to align with that clear, coherent internal signal.
That is precisely the mechanism described in these sources. This mode of interaction, this fifth mode, as some call it, is presented as a way to sort of bypass the usual linear steps, to communicate directly with possibilities that already exist as potential within that universal field.
It shifts the whole focus, doesn't it? From feeling like a passive recipient of whatever life throws at you, to being potentially an active co-creator, using this inner technology of feeling to engage directly with the potentials already inherent in the field. It's described, quite remarkably, as having the potential to rewrite personal reality.
Rewrite personal reality, that is a profound concept. It suggests a level of agency, of influence, that honestly, many of us might not have really considered possible before.
It is profound.
Oh.
And it definitely challenges our standard everyday understanding of cause and effect. It suggests that an internal cause, our deeply felt reality, can have a profound influence on external effects.
Okay, so just to recap our deep dive today, we've explored this really intriguing idea drawn from these sources about a potentially lost mode of interacting with the universe. We've seen how it flips the script, really, moving away from asking for what we lack, towards feeling as if what we desire is already here right now.
Yeah, that shift is key.
We looked at how this concept is illustrated by that powerful story from the New Mexico desert, and how it seems to echo in ancient texts, like the Aramaic Gospel of Thomas. It hints at this fundamental principle about reality and our connection to it, maybe through this often overlooked language of feeling.
And framed not just as belief, but potentially as a science of feeling, a kind of technology for conscious creation. It truly challenges the conventional ways we think about prayer or manifestation or even just setting goals. It suggests the main mechanism might not be asking an external force or just thinking hard about something,
Right.
but rather aligning our internal state, our felt reality, with a desired outcome. And by doing that, directly interacting with the possibilities already present in the field.
Absolutely. You know, it makes you pause and think back. Maybe reconsider those times in your own life when something unexpected, maybe even improbable happened. Perhaps after a period where you had this really intense focus or just a deep, clear feeling about the outcome, even if you weren't consciously trying to use a specific mode like this.
It does make you wonder. And that leaves us with a powerful thought for you, our listener, to maybe ponder this week. Just consider how much of your current reality might already be shaped, maybe unconsciously, by the dominant feelings and expectations you hold inside about yourself, your life, the world.
And then, what might become possible if you consciously chose, maybe just for a few moments each day, to feel from the perspective of your most desired future, as if it were already here.
Something to really think about, maybe even experiment with in small ways.
Definitely food for thought. As always, we really appreciate you joining us for this deep dive into the sources. We hope you'll take some time to reflect on these ideas and see how they resonate or don't with your own experiences.
Until next time.